Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 233 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book, From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing, is available now. So go and pick up that book on Amazon today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there's nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, I started experimenting on TikTok, of all places, to figure out what is the big deal with this new platform. And now, over 16,000 followers later at Greek University, I've had several videos go viral, one of which has over 267,000 views. And now we're getting consistent leads for speaking opportunities in our DMs. So if you're looking to build a presence on a social media platform that has big potential going forward, and you're noticing that your visibility is starting to drop in places like Facebook or Instagram, give TikTok a shot. Be your authentic self and see what happens. The results might just surprise you. Now, let's get to our next guest. Author, speaker, Goody PR founder, award-winning author, and podcast host Liz H. Kelly is passionate about magnifying good. After securing 500 plus media hits for her first book, Liz started her own PR agency to promote brands and has booked thousands of media interviews for clients, including The Today Show, PBS Postcards, CNN, Fast Company, Forbes, Time, BBC World News, and hundreds of local TV and podcast interviews. As a published author, Liz and her work has been featured on CNN, Fox News, Lifetime, KCBS, KTLA, USA Today, the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, Buzzfeed, BBC Radio, and many, many more. Her book is called 8-Second PR, New Public Relations Crash Course. And I have to tell you, to our listening audience, this is a must read for every fraternity and sorority PR chair that's listening right now, because we do a terrible job of training in PR. And so this is your book. This is your moment. Go and get the book today. Welcome to the show, Liz Kelly.
Well, thank you so much. And I am blushing with that introduction. I need to shorten the bio.
No, listen, I think it's great. I mean, it builds credibility, which obviously is exactly what you're looking to do on a first impression. And I think it's smart. I think it's really well constructed. And I think our college students right now, if you're listening, take a look at that bio, take a look at how she positions herself. And ultimately, I think, everybody needs to be a celebrity of sorts. Everybody's an expert in something. And I know exactly what you're an expert in.
Well, that is true. And everybody is a brand. And it all starts when you're young, especially in college. And if you join a fraternity or a sorority, what you do there can carry through the rest of your life. So it is about branding yourself. And I'm just so happy to be here.
Hey, it's our pleasure. I mean, you have so much great stuff to talk about. Let's go back to your college moment. You decided on the University of Maryland for your undergraduate experience. So what made you choose Maryland of all places?
Well, great question. I actually was a sophomore at a small private school in Virginia that was all girls. And my father said, I've got 3 kids going into college. I can't pay for everybody at once. So can you come home? And so I had 2 choices. One was Loyola in Baltimore, because I grew up in Baltimore, or the other one was University of Maryland, College Park. Well, the options were live at home in Baltimore with my parents or go to Maryland. So it was pretty easy. But then it was kind of overwhelming because I went from 800 students to 37,000. And that is the biggest reason why I joined a sorority, which we can talk about. But I wanted a home in the sea of 37,000 students.
Makes total sense to me. I mean, College Park is just a huge campus, lots and lots of students. I mean, I went to the University at Buffalo with 30,000 students. So I definitely understand where you're coming from. You need to have some smaller subset that you feel comfortable interacting with, because when you're talking about over 30,000 students, I mean, this is a sea of students. You don't even know, like, how do I interact with this many people? Like, where is my spot here? I have no idea. So let's talk about it. I mean, you joined Alpha Omicron Pi at Maryland. So what was special about the Sisters of AO Pi that made you want to join them?
Yeah, no, I loved AOPI, and there's a really cool story right now with it, but the reason why I liked it was because there was a lot of diversity. There were jocks, there were the geeks, and then there were the people that were outgoing and like to go to parties. And I always got along with everybody growing up, and that was the biggest draw. But here's a really cool story. One of my sorority sisters from AOPI, University of Maryland, I live in Los Angeles, and we went to school in College Park, Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C. Well, she tracked me down on Facebook, and we have been getting together for coffee and going on walks during the pandemic and talking. And turns out during college, which we were not that close, but this is the power of the fraternity and the sorority connections. During college, when we were at AOPI, she had an internship at the Washington Post. And now she writes for baseball for the LA Times. And I just got asked to do PR for a baseball documentary. So she is helping connect me with all these journalists and people in baseball. And it all started at AOPI.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, talk about a great testimonial. AOPI, if you're listening, that's your testimonial right there. I mean, that it really is. I mean, it's membership for life. I think people lose sight of it, especially within IFC organizations and Panhellenic organizations. I feel like a lot of students that I talk to, they really view it as a 4-year experience. And I'm like, no, I'm like, you went up to the altar, you made a commitment for life when you joined your organization. And if you understand how to leverage the power of your 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 alumni, then you're really going to maximize the benefit of this decision that you made in college. But, again, I think a lot of them just look at it as, a 4-year experience. Other councils seem to really grasp the lifetime membership aspect of it. But in IFC and Panhellenic, we have to get better at that.
Absolutely. And I left college not thinking, because I was only there 2 years, that those connections would really carry. But another guy who was in a fraternity, because, you're not just in one sorority, you're in a Greek system. So a guy who I became very close with, he is now number 2 at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Oof.
And so I've called him, I'm not doing PR for him, but just to have that kind of connection that goes back to college. And those people, they'll take your phone call because of that connection.
Yep.
And that is very powerful too. So what you're doing now, if you're in college, take note, build those relationships and make sure you stay in touch and connect on Facebook, because we didn't have Facebook when I was at Maryland.
Yeah, very true. And I think that's a great response. Every once in a while on TikTok, I'll get a comment about, oh, you bought your friends. And I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I would pay double. I would go back and pay double if I knew just how much those benefits are going to help me over a lifetime. I mean, you can say what you want, but boy, oh boy, has that come in handy and has opened up doors. And I can see clearly it has paid dividends for you as well.
Absolutely.
That's great. So, all right. So your company is Goody PR. It's a marketing agency that magnifies the good that people are doing, which is wonderful. I mean, we always talk about, the fact that the bad stuff about fraternity and sorority is always magnified instead of all the good that we do in terms of, community service and philanthropy dollars that we're raising. Share with our listeners a recent success story on one of your clients.
Absolutely. Well, I think, Goody PR, the people in the media, they want to accent the positive. So keep that in mind. A lot of times we hear negative things in the news, But when I am pitching to the media, they want to know, how can you help my audience? What kind of tips can you give my audience? So, for example, a recent success story, I worked with a client and I read his book. A lot of my clients have books or they're a small business owner, but I read his book and it was a leadership book. And he was a general manager at a big pharmaceutical company. And he had come up with a way to hire people based on behaviors versus a resume. So basically, when he would interview people, he would ask them a lot of situational questions like, if you had a conflict, how would you handle it? Can you give me an example of that? That's very popular when you go out and you start job hunting, for everybody listening. So you want to have those types of scenarios and you want to have those types of experiences when you're in college. So anyway, I pitched that to Fast Company, which is a huge business publication. And the woman came back and said, I love this. And she focuses on leadership and companies. And she did a feature story just on his method on how to hire based on behaviors. So that was a huge, huge win. Now, in another case, let's see, I have done a lot of local TV. And right now, with everything going on the news with the war in Ukraine, which is horrible, and I hope Ukraine comes out and wins, and they stop it soon because it's just horrible. But anyway, because of that, and because of events like that, it's almost impossible to get on national news. So local news is your go-to. And local is always looking to highlight the local hero. So recently, I worked with Rex Pickett, who wrote the book Sideways. And Sideways had a big movie. It was a while ago, but they won Best Adapted Screenplay at the Oscars. Anyway, so Rex Pickett is kind of a local San Diego hero. So I worked with him and my other client, and the two of them worked together, and they just launched mystery novels. And we came up with a topic, because my other client's a Grammy nominated producer, about how writers behind Oscars and Grammys can help you become a award-winning author. And we pitched it to the San Diego CBS, and they're doing a feature story on them on April 7th. And I've done hundreds of local TV, but that's an example of a local hero. Another example, I had a World War II book, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do with this book? Because it's the story is way back and we have to make it current. Anyway, it was about a guy's father's platoon. There were 40 people in the platoon. So what I did was I looked up every city that the platoon members were from, and then pitched the local markets, and ended up with 14 local TV interviews. And then I also got them the PBS Postcards story, which is going to run this month too. And just as a side tip, some of these things, they can take months to happen. So you got to be really patient and always be thinking ahead.
Great tips. Absolutely fantastic. Now, the students that are listening right now, they might not have a 30-minute or a 1-hour interview with a business owner. They might just have an 8-second ride in an elevator, and that's pretty much all they're going to get. That's their shot, right? So how can individual students who are listening share their stories in 8 seconds to a potential employer, for example?
Great question. And I think I just want to clarify, my book is called 8-Second PR because the average attention span of an adult is 8 seconds. So Michael, you're right. When you're getting in that elevator, you have about 8 seconds to make an impression. Or when you go to a job interview, you have about 8 seconds to make an impression. So if you're in person, your body language is very, very important. You want to smile, you want to wear, what makes you feel good. And that's really important. But the words matter too, and your tone matters. And my biggest tip for 8 seconds would be, come up with 3 things that you could say about yourself, so that it's all in one sentence. So, well, I'm I'm a big athlete, I'm a leader in my fraternity, and I want to help make a difference in sports. That might be somebody who is applying for a job in sports, and fill in the blank with whatever it is. Say, I want to make a difference in this field of. And I think the power of threes is so important, and that's really important for media interviews too. I had one situation where I gave an award to someone at a big event. There were 3,000 people there. I lost the TV crew when they got there because I was giving the award. I had to get to the stage. And I thought to myself, okay, what are 3 things I can say when I present this award? So I said, this award is for Amma. She's a big guru from India. She's donated $69 million to charity. And I said, this is for Amma for her worldwide charity, life of service, and making a difference. Something like that. It was like 1, 2, 3. And when I went back and I watched the TV interview, that was the only soundbite that they used. So being short and concise and clear is important in everything you do, whether you're meeting somebody at a party, meeting them in an elevator, or doing a TV interview. Get to the point immediately, and then you can expand when they say, well, what do you mean by this? But get to the point in the beginning, in the first sentence.
Love it. Great tips. And this new book that you wrote, this 8-second PR, new public relations crash course, boy, is it valuable for our PR chairs, our PR committees in our fraternities and sororities. So as we start to shift more towards an organization versus the individual student, how do you think that college, sorority, and fraternity members can develop a wow story, produce some media hooks for the local journalists, maybe the school paper, and make some powerful pitches to secure local, maybe podcast interviews about the organizational work they're doing in the community without spending a fortune, because most of them are broke?
No, I totally get it. And the book 8-Second PR is a how to do your own PR. And we wrote it specifically for people who could not afford to hire us. And it's all our PR secrets. So to answer your question about an organization, there are really 2 parts here. There's the organization, and then there is the spokesperson. So the organization, let's give the example of AOPI. We did blood drives all the time. And that was very important. So let's say your fraternity or sorority is doing a blood drive. That's great. And you want to look at numbers. The media likes that. So you could say, well, our goal is to have 500 people donate blood, or 100, whatever is realistic, but make it big enough that it sounds like, wow, I want to cover that story. But then the spokesperson should be somebody from the fraternity, sorority. Maybe it's the president, maybe it's somebody who organized the event, but somebody with a personal story. For example, my father, his life was saved because of somebody who donated blood, is very powerful and gets you from boring to wow.
I love that. Yeah, sharing a story is great. I mean, the best speakers out there, the reason why they're really good is they're master storytellers. And so if you can combine your data, your numbers, with a powerful story on how you're making an impact, boom, those 2 together are going to absolutely explode. And so that's wonderful advice. You're also the UCLA Extension Instructor for Digital Marketing. So let's talk about that. We have leaders right now in our sororities and fraternities that are trying to get more engagement on their social media posts to attract more new members. How should they go about doing that?
Well, there is a whole method behind that, and that is a really good question. Chapter 2 in 8-Second PR is all about digital marketing, but just to give your listeners some quick tips, I think one is funny equals money. Somebody taught me that at a seminar. So if you can add humor that is in good taste, obviously be careful about it, because not everybody thinks what you think is funny. So keep it in good taste, and maybe run it by somebody else. But funny equals money would be a good way to get engagement. Video obviously is huge right now. So using Reels on Instagram or TikTok is also going to get you a lot more engagement. But I also think doing things like running a contest is important. And you don't have to spend a lot of money on running a contest, because maybe the prize is that they get a one-on-one meeting with your president about leadership skills, or how did they become president of the fraternity or the sorority. Maybe that is the win. But I think coming up with catchy campaigns is also important. So, for example, the blood drive example, if you're going to do that, make that something fun on social media. If you are raising money for underserved kids or a scholarship foundation, that's also really good. It's all about magnifying good. I mean, that's what people want to hear on social media. They don't want to hear as much the negative. They don't really want to hear about politics. So keep it light, keep it fun, and ask them for their opinions too. Get them involved by saying, "What do you think?"
Yeah, I love all that. I think that's great tips right there. Obviously, fraternity and sorority members want to change the narrative, and they complain a lot that only the negative stories get picked up. But the truth is, I mean, I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of PR within our fraternities and sororities. The truth is, if you ask them, what's your budget for the PR committee, the answer is always zero. You ask them, what is the training like for the PR chair? The answer is, what training? You ask them, what metrics are you using to decide if your PR is effective or not? They have no metrics. And then you ask them, okay, well, how did this person get the job as PR chair, right? What makes them qualified? And they're like, well, they lost every other election for exec board, so the next position up was PR chair. I mean, and I'm just like, well, no wonder we're having a PR problem in fraternity or sorority. You know what I'm saying?
No wonder. Well, I think that communications majors would be really good for PR.
Yeah.
And I think that, I talked to this one guy yesterday who was a University of Maryland graduate who I met through my, we'll call it sorority sister, who works at the LA Times. And his name is Charles Steinberg, and everybody should look him up because he has helped do PR and help get 6 World Series titles for teams like the Red Sox, the LA Dodgers, the Baltimore Orioles. I mean, he's just an incredible rock star. But he said to me, Liz, what really changed my career was my writing skills and my communication skills. So pick somebody to be your PR person who loves communication and loves the art of writing, because that is all really critical. And you also, with PR, with a fraternity and a sorority, there were many things that happened at Maryland when I was there that were not good in the Greek system, but there were also positive things. And the positive things don't always get picked up in the news because you have to be really proactive and you have to come up with that wow story to get them to cover it. And you have to be a little vulnerable. You have to be able to say, if it was not for this, this would have happened.
Yeah, you've
So
given some good
those would be my tips.
Yeah, you've given some good tips for sure. I think, combining the data with some kind of personal story, I think is a way to overcome some of those obstacles, maybe on the good stories that fraternities and sororities are doing. And the other thing I think about is, I'm sure some of our listeners, they've given some thought about writing their own book one day. I really believe that there's a book in every human walking around. Whether or not they decide to write it is another story. But what are some ways that authors today can stand out? Because there's over 4,600 books that are published every single day in the United States. And it seems like books will just kind of get lost in the shuffle. So how can you stand out?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's 4,600 books per day published in the United States. So it is really hard to stand out. And some of the tips that I would give is think about marketing from the beginning, right? So don't just write anything, come up with a catchy title that is unique and Google the title. what drives me crazy is when a client comes to me and they have a title that's a cliche phrase or it's one word and it's been overused because there's no SEO, there's no search engine optimization, which means when you go to Google and they would type in your title, if you use something like preventable, I talked to an author yesterday, they want to use that. That's not going to work because preventable is just an overused word. But he's a doctor, so I told him to call the book The Preventable Doctor. Now, what he does is up to him, but the title is really key. So that's number one. Number two, don't make it overwhelming. Start with the table of contents. To me, that's your data dump. That's your brainstorm. That's okay. How many chapters am I going to have? And how am I going to lead the reader through whatever my story is? Now, I specialize a lot in nonfiction books with people telling their story with tips to help others, because that is what the media wants to hear. They want to hear these tips. But then I've also worked with people who do a children's book or a memoir. And what I do all the time is I look at those books and I say, what is the story behind the story of the author? And what kind of lesson are they trying to give to the world? Because that really is what the media cares about. So those would be the tips. Come up with a catchy title, buy the URL from GoDaddy, make sure you can buy it, get all the social media with that name, and then start with the table of contents.
Absolutely perfect. And what's interesting about your story is that you created your PR agency after you were laid off 3 times. So what's your advice to a recent college graduate that maybe gets laid off so that way they can reinvent themselves?
That is true. I got laid off more times than I can count, and it was not fun. But each time I got stronger, and each time I said to myself, there's a reason, there's a bigger reason here. So my advice is you will bounce back, and you need to look at it as a positive opportunity and say, what do I really want to do? So for example, the first layoff was after 9/11. Well, you know, lots of businesses were shutting down after 9/11. So what I did was I wrote my first book. It was a dating book. It was fun. It was lighthearted. That's the one that got the 500 media interviews that led me to starting Goody PR. Now, if I hadn't had that layoff, I would have never had that time to write that book. So you do want to be constructive with your time, and maybe you volunteer, because you might meet people when you volunteer that then hire you and get you back in a job that's better for you. Another thing is reach out to people you admire and say, I want to have coffee with you and find out about your job and how did you get your job, or how did you start your company? And that can be an incredible experience. And that's really how I started my PR agency. I picked up the phone, I called people who had done it and said, how do you do this? And honestly, I am happier being self-employed as an entrepreneur than I was in the corporate world. But I do think getting a corporate job in the beginning, right after you get out of college, can be very helpful because you can learn a lot of key things. But, be positive also when you are being interviewed about, like, why'd you get laid off? Just say, well, 9/11 happened. It was out of our control, and don't trash the previous company, because then that makes you look like a negative person. So just keep it on a high note. Keep your answer quick about what happened and move on to the positive.
Yeah, you and I are alike in many, many ways. I, at one point, worked for the corporate world, and being a star performer got me, I think it was like a 2% raise or something like that. And
Yeah.
I was like the best in the company. And I looked at it and I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I think I'm going to try entrepreneurial instead, because this doesn't seem right to me. But I learned a lot. And so, I think that was the benefit there, and everything happens for a reason. I think, when I lost positions, I will tell you, it was a devastating thing for me at that moment, but that led me to the next big thing. And it led me to the next big entrepreneurial idea. And even during the pandemic, when, speakers ordinarily weren't being asked to travel to a campus because the campus was essentially shut down, we just pivoted to virtual programming. And then we just started writing books. And, and so good things happen, during these times. And I think you're absolutely right. We have to look for the good instead of, just dwelling on the bad. You can look at a situation and say, yeah, this kind of sucks, but maybe we can turn this into a positive somehow. And so we're alike in many, many ways.
Exactly. And I do a lot of walks. I do a lot of talking to people, and you have to take that time out. You have to take that time for yourself so that you can put on a positive face when you're under pressure, or when you're in an interview, and like this one. But yeah, being positive is really important in many ways.
Yeah. 100%. Now, we do love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. And I know where you live out in Santa Monica, California. I mean, you have a hotbed of good food over there. So I'm wondering, the next time I'm in Santa Monica, what restaurant should I be going to? Where should I go and eat?
Well, that is a great question. Well, I was thinking for your audience, I think the top restaurant I would recommend is something called Father's Office. And Father's Office is all about one of the best hamburgers and French fries in town. And sometimes it's hard to get into. And one time I actually had a friend say, "Where can you get the best hamburger in LA?" And I said, "Father's Office." And they had a friend from out of town. They were taking them to the airport later, and it ended up being Super Bowl Sunday. And I said, "I'll take you." And we walked right in because nobody was there on Super Bowl Sunday. So I would say Father's Office. If you want healthy food, there are things like Art's Table. I really like Art's Table because it's light and healthy. It's things like salmon and steak salad and just wonderful things. So, and I love eating outside, and that's one of the best things about Santa Monica. You can see Santa Monica Bay behind me on the screen if you're watching a video. But anyway, I love being able to eat outside all the time, and we have heating lamps year round. You can eat anywhere outside.
Oh man, Liz, you're making me hungry talking about these great restaurants, and I'm dreaming of, eating by the ocean. It was something that my family and I did when we were living on Long Island in New York, and now I just don't get a chance to do it because I live in Nashville and I'm locked by land, and I need the ocean. So I'm
Well,
gonna have to
come
come out and
visit.
visit. Yeah, that's right. I'm gonna come and visit you, and we'll definitely go get some hamburgers together. That sounds like a plan. So
Awesome.
this has been great. So if our listeners, if they want to pick up your book, if they want to hire you to come and speak on their college campus, where should they go to connect with you?
Well, I would absolutely love that. Either one. Just check out Goody with a Y, goodypr.com. You'll find everything there. Or you can go to 8secondpr.com and follow me everywhere. Please follow me on Instagram and social media at Liz H. Kelly. The H is important because, Liz Kelly's like Liz Smith. So Liz H. Kelly.
There
And
you
that's
go,
important
Liz.
when you're branding yourself. Think about that when you're writing your book, because that Liz H. Kelly is a pen name. That's my grandmother's name, because my real name is Heisler, like Chrysler. It's got 3 vowels. Nobody can say it, spell it, forget it. So Liz H. Kelly.
I love it. This has been absolutely fantastic. Pick up Liz's book. It's called 8-Second PR, New Public Relations Crash Course. I know you're going to absolutely love it. And follow Liz H. Kelly, Kelly, on social media. Liz, you're the best. What can I say? Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. And thanks to all the listeners. And please go out there and change the world, and contact me if you have any questions. I'm happy to help.
That's fantastic. To our listeners, if you like this interview with Liz, make sure that you like it. Make sure you share it with other students on campus. And we will see you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.